Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Holocaust Museum LA, I'm Jordana Gessler, Vice President of Education and Exhibits at Holocaust Museum LA, which is a museum that was founded in 1961 by a group of Holocaust survivors who had moved to Los Angeles to create a home for themselves and their families. They wanted to also create a space for future generations to learn about their horrific experiences and build a more dignified and humane world. Today, the museum continues their mission of and provides free Holocaust education to students from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of the museum to commemorate, educate, and inspire. Thank you for joining this month's installment of Building Bridges, which focuses on the Afghan refugee crisis. Building Bridges is a monthly program in which we invite different community members to speak about important topics related to Holocaust history, as well as building community and learning from it to create a more dignified future. Currently in Afghanistan, the US military withdrawal and the reinstallation of a Taliban government has created an urgent and devastating refugee crisis. Translators and other US allies fear reprisals from the new regime, while women and girls stand to lose basic freedoms, such as their ability to work or go to school. This humanitarian emergency calls upon us to support the people of Afghanistan and their dreams of a better life. Time is of the essence. Leaders from organizations working on behalf of Afghan refugees and asylum seekers will discuss how recent events have impacted the people of Afghanistan and what we can do to help. Of course, this program, like all of our Building Bridges programs, is moderated by the great Dan Schnur, who is a museum board member and also a professor at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and UC Berkeley. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to Dan.
Jordana, thank you very much, both for your help with this program and all the tremendous work that you and your colleagues do at the museum on a daily basis. And for those of you who have not had a chance to visit the museum recently because of COVID, we are beginning to do in-person programs again, and we'll hope to have a chance to see all of you again in person before too long. But before we get, but in the meantime, here on Zoom, we have a really exciting program. And Jordana told you a little bit about the content and the substance of what we're going to be talking about. But I'm going to take a moment before we get started to introduce our guests, because we're very fortunate today to have three very smart, very well-informed, very insightful experts on this crisis. And I had a chance to talk with all of them not too long ago. I think you'll be just as excited to hear their perspectives over the course of the next hour. So first of all, Etleva Bejko is the Director of Refugee Resettlement at the Jewish Family Service of San Diego. And she's been serving the community through refugee work for over 20 years. During her time at JFS, she's been responsible for managing the refugee resettlement programs that provide direct services to the newly arriving families. These services including accessing all public and private institutions and resources, healthcare provision, education attainment, ongoing case management through in-house employment programs, or working with community partners and orienting clients to their new culture and their new community. Etleva, we're so happy to have you with us today. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you.
Of course. Joe Goldman is the Community Engagement Director for the Western region at HIAS, which is the world's oldest and only Jewish international humanitarian agency. They serve refugees and asylum seekers of all backgrounds. He mobilizes activists, organizations, and lawmakers across California to ensure that displaced people are treated with the dignity they deserve. Previously, Joe's worked at Maison, the Jewish Response to Hunger, where he advocated to expand access to the social safety net for vulnerable communities nationwide. Joe holds his bachelor's in political communications and a master's in political management from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And he now lives in his native Los Angeles with his husband, Adam. And Joe, we're very excited to have you here today, given the perspective you bring. Thank you so much for joining us. And then last, but certainly not least, Habib Zahori is a journalist. He's a fiction writer and a Fulbright scholar from Afghanistan, who, as he was telling us just a moment ago, was born in Kandahar, but raised in Kabul, although he now lives in Canada, where he's about to become a Canadian citizen, if I'm not mistaken. So congratulations for that, Habib. Habib's work as a war reporter has been featured in both American and European news media outlets, like the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the BBC, and the New York Times. And besides working as a journalist, Habib also has a PhD in medicine and is currently pursuing a master's in international relations at the University of Denver. He's also been instrumental in the creation and success of a television program that's directly relevant to today's conversation. And I'll be excited to talk with you about that, Habib, in addition to your other experiences and accomplishments as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We're very grateful to you too.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I see from the chat box, you already have fans who are signing on. So the Habib fan club will form, or I guess grow, it probably already exists at the end of today's program. So I've given a very, and perhaps unfairly brief overview of all three of you and your work. And so what I'm hoping each of you could do individually is tell our group a little bit more about your organization and the work you do, so they can understand it in greater detail before we dig into the rest of the conversation. Joe, I'm wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about HIAS and both the organization's broader goals and your specific focus in the context of these current challenges.
Absolutely, and thank you again for having me, and I'm so grateful for the partnership that HIAS has with the Holocaust Museum LA. You know, that in fact, you'll see some artifacts from some of the work that HIAS has done over the years on exhibit in the museum. If you haven't gone, you should. And as Dan mentioned, you know, we are the world's oldest and only Jewish international humanitarian agency working with refugees and asylum seekers of all backgrounds. We now operate across 5 continents and 17 countries. We started as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. We just go by our acronym now, but we started in the 1880s in direct response to pogroms in Eastern Europe. We're so old that legend has it that Emma Lazarus was a full-time volunteer with us when she wrote her poem, The Great Colossus, Give Me Your Tired, Your Poor, Your Huddled Masses Yearning to Breathe Free, that is now on the Statue of Liberty. We have resettled millions of people, Jews who fled pogroms, the Nazis, expulsion and violence from throughout the Middle East, North Africa, repression in the Soviet Union, and the revolution in Iran. We have resettled huge numbers of Persian Jews here in Los Angeles, for example, making LA home to the largest Persian Jewish community. We also assisted with every wave of Aliyah to Israel. And of course, we have always worked with non-Jews, even when they weren't always our primary client population. For example, people who are fleeing Southeast Asia after the Vietnam War. About 20 years ago, we reached a pinnacle that no one ever thought would ever come to fruition, which is the fact that the vast majority of Jews around the world lived in places with freedom of movement. Maybe not free from anti-Semitism, but certainly freedom of movement. They could pick up and go to another country if they chose to do so. And yet the need to continue this work on helping refugees has never been greater. In fact, we are in the midst of the worst refugee crisis in human history as we speak right now. And with HIAS's expertise going back longer than any other agency on earth, we recommitted to this effort with an updated focus. We helped refugees because they were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we are Jewish. HIAS has worked with Afghan refugees for decades, but especially once the war in Afghanistan began, the volume of clients we worked with from Afghanistan really skyrocketed. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans and their families are eligible in the United States for something called a special immigrant visa due to their work as interpreters, translators, and so many other forms of US government and NATO functions. SIVs, again, from special immigrant visas, are eligible to be part of the regular refugee resettlement system, which I'll explain a little bit more later. But HIAS then resettles Afghans all over the country, but especially here in California. We have a huge concentration in the Bay Area, which is home to Little Kabul and Fremont, just like how LA has Tehrangeles and Westwood, and also in San Diego. And so we have our affiliate partner agencies, JFCS East Bay, JFS Silicon Valley, and our rock star Southern California partner, JFS San Diego. And for more of what these aspects look like and the work that JFS San Diego does, I'm going to pivot right over to Etleva.
So, Leva, maybe you can tell us, take a few minutes to tell us about Jewish Family Services and the work that you do in San Diego.
Absolutely. Yes, and thank you, Joe, for setting up the scene so easily for me to jump in directly to what do the local resettlement agencies do. So at the national level, HIAS is the representative for all the Jewish Family Service network of partners that provide the local services, but obviously refugees are going to so many different areas in the country. And as they get into that community, the need for direct services is identified from the moment they get from the out of the plane until ongoing services and how we connect with them. But a little bit about the history of Jewish Family Service of San Diego, also to put things in context. JFS was actually established in 1918, so not as old as HIAS, but close enough. And being at the border, a group of women volunteers started providing services for people that were fleeing the First World War. It was the Jolly 16, they called themselves. It's in our website, the history of the 16 women that just decided that something needed to be done because people were left without clothes or food or any type of services as they were waiting at the Tijuana border to cross over in United States, fleeing war in Europe. And then once they got across the border, other needs were identified, like employment and identifying school for children and housing. And today, 103 years later, the Refugee Resettlement Program for Jewish Family Service continues to remain a core of the programs that it still provides and does similar work in helping new families that have to flee for war and persecution, as Joe was explaining, and then have to completely rebuild their life in a new community where they don't speak the language, don't have the support network of their family members and friends. And we are the first line of defense, if you will. We are the first connection to these newly arriving refugees into the community. JFS over 100 years providing services have served refugees from anywhere in the world. I've been with the organization for 15 years now in my role as a refugee resettlement director. And I'm originally from Albania, which is a small country in Southeastern Europe. And I had to flee. I'm not, again, comparing my story or journey of immigration to the United States to anybody or what's going on in some countries, or especially what's going on in Afghanistan now. But having that perspective of what it takes to reestablish your life in the United States, it gives you a little bit more of a perspective on where can you be more useful? How do we build programs that make a difference for the clients? Our whole staff is actually bilingual, bicultural. We consider ourselves to be a mini United Nations around here, just because there is so many languages being spoken all the time around us, with clients, staff with them amongst themselves. When we used to have potlucks before COVID, you cannot beat our potlucks because there's such a rich culture, and that's a way to bring people together. So again, going back to the services that we provide, Jewish Family Service is today a larger organization with over 50 programs that addresses issues such as food insecurity, housing insecurity, mainstream population, has a really significant immigration program that provides services to people that are seeking immigration relief, but continues to do the refugee resettlement program because it not only remains a need, as Joe was explaining, but it's also part of the core values of Jewish Family Service of San Diego, which is welcoming the stranger and repairing the world. We don't do everything we wish to amongst our programs because the process of integration is a long-term one, and it could be a little bit different for every client. But the role of the resettlement agency is being that initial phase of the community, welcoming the family and connecting them to ongoing services, which I can go in a little bit more detail later. as we explain what is the role of the resettlement agencies and how do we help families be successful in their adjustment in our community.
Etleva, thank you so much. And I agree with you. There's several follow-up questions that I'm going to hope to be able to get to just to dig deeper into the overview that you've given us. But before that, I want to make sure to bring Habib into this conversation, because just as we've heard both a national and a local perspective, Habib, we're especially excited to have you with us to provide a personal perspective, both in terms of your own journey, the path that your family's taken. Tell us a little bit about your own experience, if you will. And then when we move further into the conversation, I think our audience will have a better understanding of the perspective that your experience gives you in facing these challenges.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me here. So I was a journalist in Afghanistan. I studied medicine, but then I quit medicine, went to journalism because I love journalism. And then in 2014, I came to the United States and for a Fulbright scholarship. And then when I finished my studies, I was about to go back to Afghanistan, and my father ran into some trouble with some relatives, in the south where my family is from. So my father was kidnapped, from a funeral. So the family decided that I should not go back to Afghanistan. But I couldn't stay in the US because my visa was running out of time. So I had to cross the border in January. I came to Canada, and where I'm living right now. And I've been working on a sitcom for CBS sitcom called United States of Al, which is the story of an Afghan interpreter who used to work with the US Marines in the South, where the bulk of the fighting happened. And now he has immigrated to the United States through the Special Immigration Visa Program. And this is the story of this one Muslim Afghan man arriving in the United States, trying to establish his life, a new life for himself in a new country, new culture. His only connection is this Marine friend and his family. And this year, when Kabul fell, we're in the middle of writing new scripts for the season 2 that we're working on. And suddenly we got the news that the country has fallen to Taliban. And I had family there, cousins, sisters. They were all working for the government. Some of them were working for the embassies. So I spent like a week and a half just trying to get my siblings out. They went through all those horrors of that you may have watched on TV, trying to get into the airport. And we finally managed to get them out to the airport, and then they just ended up in different airplanes, and they were flown to different parts of the country, the world. So now my family is just like completely scattered around the world. Some of them are in the UK, some of them are in the Netherlands, some are here in the United States. They're all living in refugee camps. And my own experience during this 1 week and a half inspired a new premiere for our season 2, which is directly connected to every single experience that I had during that 1 week and a half to get my family out. And our premiere is, tonight. We're premiering that show, and we wrote it as a drama instead of a sitcom. So no jokes, no laughter, nothing. It's just a drama because it was such a tragic event.
Yeah. Habib, if I can, I'd love to follow up. I'd love to follow up on this, because of course the show has received tremendous reviews, and I'd encourage our audience to check it out. But even aside from tonight's episode, which, as you said, is more of a drama than a comedy, one of the things that has struck me in the past in hearing you talk about this is that the goal of the show is both to entertain its audience, but also to educate them. And I'm wondering if you can tell me, both from your own experience and from your work on the United States of Al, what is it that you hope the show's audience, or more broadly, a North American audience, to understand about the crisis and about Afghani refugees?
So for a lot of people who only get their news, their information about Afghanistan and Afghans from certain media outlets, Afghanistan is this place where there's always war. I mean, like, there's some truth to it, but it's also true that the people that live there and are from there, they're just like normal human beings, like any other human being around the world. They have aspiration, they have hopes, they have families. And so our goal with this show is, yes, to entertain and also to educate people about that those other aspects of Afghans and Muslims in general. And our hope is that people fall in love with Awal Mir, who's the main character in this story, and hopefully through this show we provide enough cultural, religious, and historical background for the way he thinks and the way he reacts to the things that he sees in the United States. Our emphasis, like, is so much on how he's been raised in this family where there's so much respect for elders, for neighbors, for community and stuff like that. So he brings all those positive things with him into his new community in the United States, in Ohio.
Habib, thank you very much. Joe, I want to bring you back into the conversation, because I think what Habib tells us and the perspective he provides is a valuable one, but this certainly isn't a new challenge. And it certainly isn't anything recent for good people here in the US and around the world to try to step in and help in these kind of situations. I'm wondering if you can provide us a little bit of a historical perspective, particularly what might be of particular interest to those who are frequent participants in programs sponsored by the Holocaust Museum.
Sure, and I think what's really important to remember, I mentioned earlier that we are in the midst of the worst refugee crisis in human history. There are 82.5 million people who are forcibly displaced. About 26.5 million of those people are registered with the United Nations as refugees. Those are people who have crossed international borders. They're in refugee camps, hoping to, if they are among less than 1% of all of those 26.5 million people will maybe get resettled in a third country. Most of them don't. They stay in second countries. And so, when we talk about refugees coming to the United States, we're talking about a teeny tiny number of people. And you're looking at an entire system that was actually created in direct response to what happened after the Holocaust, because the world after World War II also had a devastating refugee crisis. And so you can imagine there's actually a lot of parallels in terms of the systems that are in place now and whatnot. And it's important for folks to see, the international community recognized that there was a serious need for people to be able to seek refuge from fleeing persecution, just as Afghans are fleeing the Taliban today. There were no norms back then for of that kind for Jews, and it could have saved countless lives. And so in direct response, the international community organized the UN Geneva Convention on Refugees in 1951 that created the entire refugee and asylum resettlement system that we know today. Both the United States and Israel happen to be signatories. Although the United States upheld its end of the treaty, it also codified the treaty unanimously in Congress in the 1980 Refugee Act, establishing a bipartisan, then ironclad consensus that welcoming refugees is the right thing to do for our national security, for our foreign policy, and our economic well-being. And it's worth noting that America's Jewish community wouldn't exist if it does today, if not for the 1951 UN Geneva Convention, especially the LA Jewish community, Holocaust survivors and their progeny, Jews from the former Soviet Union, Persian Jews, and even Israeli Jews whose ancestors were resettled by HIAS in Israel. Because again, remember, the resettlement system adopted by the international community just 3 years after Israel's establishment played a pivotal role in ensuring safer journeys for those people who were fleeing to Israel in the first place. So when we see people making these repugnant claims that we shouldn't let people who are fleeing persecution seek refuge here, either as refugees who are processed abroad or as asylum seekers who are coming to our border, just as Habib was saying, he sought asylum in Canada. When you see people say, well, if they're Muslim, they shouldn't be able to come here, or they're too poor, or, all these blanket terms that are used to basically denote that they're coming from a non-white country, we need to see it as an affront, not just on values and decades of bipartisan consensus, but also an affront on Jewish history and on the fact that so much of the Jewish community and all of our allies who claim to love us, should know, and I'll end by saying, just as we saw the horrific treatment of Haitian asylum seekers at our southern border, and now we are seeing several Midwestern and Southern politicians in particular, but they're all over the place, saying that we shouldn't welcome Afghan refugees because they're Muslim. We can't keep saying or have our allies say never again about the Holocaust and then turn a blind eye to the very attacks on the systems that played a pivotal role in keeping Jews safe after the fact. It makes a mockery of everything we claim to stand for.
Well, I guess, Joe, that historical perspective is absolutely invaluable. Thank you so much. And you're right, these lessons are age old and resonate today as they have for such a long time. Etleva, it seems to me that from what Joe is saying, that there really is a direct link between the purpose of the Holocaust Museum and the challenges of the current crisis. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that link and perhaps provide us some additional historical perspective.
Sure. So picking up on both what Habib and Joe said, and focusing in a little bit on the work that we are doing to responding to the Afghan evacuee crisis, because the terms can be used interchangeably and people confuse a little bit who is an asylum seeker and who is a refugee and who is an asylee. And without wanting to go in the full definition, but for the benefit of our audience or the ones that would like to see the distinguishment between all of them, refugees and asylees technically are one category of immigration application. Both are fleeing persecution, past or future persecution, or are unable to return to their country. The main difference is that the refugees flee to another country are referred for resettlement to the United States, and their whole process, meaning immigration interviews, background checks, medical clearances, cultural orientation, whatever it needs to make them eligible to travel to United States as refugee, happens outside of US. For asylum seekers, that could be people from all over the world. I'm sure you've heard what's been happening at our southern border here, and that's either people have no opportunity to flee to a country that is safe, or are individually attacked and not part of a group and are presenting at the border and seeking protection. And seeking asylum is an international law, is a right protected to everyone that is looking for a credible fear interview. However, to kind of focus our conversation on the Afghan crisis, as we were talking about, the refugees and the SIVs, as Joe just described, the special immigrant visas, are coming to United States through the US Refugee Admissions Program, which it's a very well coordinated interdepartmental program between Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services. SIV, and especially Afghani SIVs, are not a new group that are coming to our communities. Specifically, Jewish Family Service has worked with SIVs at least since 2010, and I could pull some reports for another presentation I had to do, but I guess it's valuable to share that over those 10 years, we've served over 650 individuals. And the way that this was identified is that as people were working with the US military troops in Afghanistan, they were either directly being threatened or their families being threatened because of their affiliation with the US military. So there was this special immigrant visa added to the categories that immigration would afford to somebody that provided support to the US military troops. And as they were coming into the country, the local resettlement agencies were providing support in connecting them to ongoing services, housing, education, enrolling children in school. So because of that effort, JFS San Diego was part of this early response into the current Afghani crisis that we're seeing. But the announcement of withdrawal of the troops, what that created, it kind of gave an urgency to get people that were there still in the process of applying for SIV visa, but either were not able to travel yet or were in the middle of the process. And now with no military, US military personnel being there, completely out of any form of protection and under direct attack. So the decision was made to bring people at safety, either in a third country or in the military bases in United States, complete their process here, and then assign them to different areas where they will actually permanently live and be part of the community. There are a lot of details that are related to that process, and it's not ideal because when you are part of the US refugee program, there is some preparation period which allows the resettlement agencies locally to create what is called the reception plan. So we identify resources, connect to the community. This is a public-private partnership, and we cannot do it without the support of our communities. The Jewish community for one, but the whole San Diego community has been very responsive. And that's where we go for volunteers, in-kind donations, food. Sometimes they even cook meals or come to the airport and help us pick up the families. And especially with the quick pace that the new families are arriving with so little notice that we are getting of the Afghan families coming in, we literally could not have done it without the community, which is completely like overwhelmed us in a good way with their response. What this is doing for the families though is, imagine if you are an SIV that is in the middle of the process, things are okay as they can be in Afghanistan, and I'm sure Habib can share more about the situation there than I can ever even try to. However, in terms of a process, there is a 14 steps process to apply for an SIV visa. So you have submitted your application, you are preparing all your package, you're getting ready, it takes months. So people have a different mindset in terms of how you leave your country for good and how you get away from your family forever. And then all of a sudden on August 1st or 2nd, whatever the date of the announcement was, you are now an SIV in the middle of the process, but without access to completing it and don't know what's going to be coming up next. And once you have seen again, as Habib mentioned, the videos, which I couldn't myself, actually, it's a huge reminder of what happened in my country in the 90s when people were fleeing and no care for human safety. People were in such a rush that was a priority to leave, and we saw the horrific pictures as well. But now people are left without real venues to leave the country. There is a lot of categories that need protection, but everything is gone. The process it doesn't exist. The US embassy that is processing them is moved to the airport, and there are only a few military planes, and you might not get an opportunity to let anybody else know that you need to flee. You have a passport, you don't have a passport, you have to find a military, and those are things that we have heard from the clients. I'm not guessing them. When we ask the families as they are coming in, how did you get out? How did you even hear? And they would find friends in the military to allow them in the planes. But then once they're out, then what is next? And some of the families went to Qatar and other countries before they got processed, still went to the military bases when they came to US, spent quite a few days in the military bases as they completed the process, got their vaccination. And when when they came to San Diego, as we accepted the families coming in, you could see that there was so much relief for the journey to be over and then finally be at the final destination, but also so much anxiety, worry about families that they left behind, and also sometimes guilt, actually, because they know that the family members, the extended family, their parents, their brother might be under attack just because of their personal connection to the US military. So when we're talking about the services we provide historically, the programs have a very structured way of systems that connect them to a network of service providers to make sure they have that long-term access to adjustment and integration. Now we had to shift the way we did things. There are priorities in terms of making sure that we have that initial phase that we're addressing the most immediate needs of people that are coming through a very traumatic journey, and also focusing towards the long term. We still need to make sure that they are actually ready to for the children to be enrolled in school. Adults start learning ESL if that's a need, look for employment. But it's too soon to think of that. Right now, our focus is to make sure that we're welcoming the families, making sure they're okay, making sure they have the most immediate basic needs met as we work toward that long term.
Yeah, Etleva, thank you so much, because I think both stressing the urgency of the immediate situation, but also the recognition that even once this immediate crisis has passed, there is still so much to be done. And I do want to come back to the immediate in just a moment or two. But Habib, let me bring you back into this conversation if I can. And by the way, we do have a question and answer box for any questions from all of you. There are two questions in the box. One asking a question, Alicia Blair, who appears to be a very generous woman, and it appears that JFS might be able to be of some help to her. A second question, more specific to HIAS. And what I'd ask Jordana is if you wouldn't mind getting their information, and then either Etleva and Joe or one of their colleagues can get back to them independent of this program. But if anyone else has any questions, either about specific needs or broader concerns, please don't hesitate to post them, and we'll do our best to integrate them into our final 20 minutes or so of program. And by the way, Paula Steinmetz, actually, Habib is working not on a movie, at least not yet, but on a television show called The United States of Al, and that airs on CBS. Is that correct, Habib?
That's true.
Okay, and the season premiere is tonight, so your timing couldn't be better. Habib, let me ask you this question, because Etleva alluded just briefly to the fact that as urgent as the immediate crisis is, it's not like the problem goes away once these immediate needs have been met. You're a journalist, which means you probably understand better than most of us the fleeting nature of news. Something that's a headline today doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves in a week, a month, or a year. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the longer term challenges at work here. I know you've talked a lot about and thought a lot about language challenges, cultural differences, and other adjustments for a newly arrived individual or family with which communities can help. Well, talk a little bit, if you can, about those longer term challenges, if you would.
Thank you very much. Yes, so for a lot of people who are not refugees, it's just a headline or a news bulletin that they watch and then they move away. But for the person who is a refugee, getting to the United States or any other country is the first step. The actual challenge starts once they arrive in the country that they seek asylum. Most of the time, like I was lucky, my siblings are lucky. They can speak the language. They are familiar with the American culture through movies and books and stuff. But there are a lot of people who are not familiar with the way the United States laws work or the culture, the food. Food is a big challenge for a lot of people, and it's just new experience. They don't know how to navigate the systems that exist. A lot of the time, They have problems in courts. A lot of the time they have problems at the hospitals. They don't have people to explain what their rights are, what they can access to, what they cannot access. But to me, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people face is the fact that once they arrive, they are stuck in these countries. They cannot travel to see their loved ones. That's one of the biggest challenges that they face. To create for parents, it's very, very difficult to integrate in the society because they don't speak the language. But for children, it's much easier. Finding good schools, those are the biggest challenges for some of the families that I'm friend with here in Canada. Jobs, these are people who pride themselves on being very hardworking people. They can do any kind of jobs, but it's really difficult for them to know where they should look for jobs. So these are some of the challenges that they face once they arrive in these new countries.
Thank you so much, Habib. And Joe, I'm overdue to bring you back into the conversation, but I feel like as we're talking about longer term challenges, as critically important as the personal and community-based approaches are that Etleva and Habib are talking about, there's broader challenges. And I know that your background before you did this kind of work was in politics, which means in addition to everything you know about this issue, you know a lot about advocacy, you know a lot about the importance of lobbying and working toward policy change. So at that broader level, whether at local, state, and national government, there's all sorts of advocacy work to be done in terms of refugee policy, housing policy, immigration policy. Can you talk about that long-term challenge and what needs to be done?
Absolutely. And also, and one of the questions in the Q&A was, what could we, citizens, what could we regular people do, right? Well, there's a lot you could do. It is, but I will say it is advocacy, as you shared, Dan. And a lot of it, though, I know it doesn't feel as sexy, right, as the literal, tangible going to the airport and meeting, a refugee or helping them set up their apartment or, but it is something that actually on a systemic level in terms of helping the most people will have the greatest impact. And what I, want to remind folks is that refugee policy is pretty much under full control of the executive branch, a lesson that we painfully learned during the previous administration. I believe I mentioned this earlier, we had a bipartisan refugee admissions average per year of about 95,000 people, which is a tiny number when you look at the millions of immigrants that we typically absorb each year. But the final fiscal year under the Trump administration, their presidential determination, that's the term used, of the number of refugees that could be let in each year, were only 15, it was only 15,000. And that led, and when you think about just the number of how much we truncated the system, it led to a lot of affiliates closing. HIAS used to have, I think, twice as many resettlement partners on the ground, like JFS San Diego. And so those numbers went way down. We do expect under this administration a new presidential determination of 125,000 refugees. It should be signed in the next few days. And we did see that Congress, in avoiding a government shutdown last week, also appropriated the funding for that and funding to help with Afghan humanitarian parolees, not just those who are granted SIVs. And so, that's one of the big contexts that we have to think about in terms of, particularly with Afghans. And that's why HIAS is calling for, some legislative fixes, because we have so many humanitarian parolees, meaning that they're going to have to figure out either do they have to seek asylum, or are they going to be able to be special immigrant visas, or do they get allocated into the refugee program? It's a whole hodgepodge that's really messy, even when there's funding for case managers like those who work with Etleva to serve them. And so, that's why we're pushing for things like the Afghan Adjustment Act, which would basically allow newly arriving Afghans to have expedited processes to become legal permanent residents. It would allow for us to avoid a huge diversion of resources that are already needed for really strained asylum and refugee processing backlogs. And so that's one of the things that we are asking folks to take action on. And taking a further step back, immigration policy as a whole has been at a standstill in Congress for decades. We also see, other issues that are deeply related to resettlement in California, like the state's failure to build more housing for people at all income levels. It's something that touches not just on this issue, but many, many others. And it harms our ability to be as welcoming as a state as we seek to be. And that requires us, like in so many other policy areas, to have a deeper understanding of the history of racism and classism that informed a lot of those decisions in policies in years past that we are now paying the consequences for, because those inform the policy solutions that we have to take moving forward. And so there's a lot that can be done at the state and local level when it comes to both allocating funding and asking the state to do so for allocating funding for agencies that do this work. California is actually the only state in the country that's trying to help plug any gaps for where the federal government isn't helping with Afghan resettlement, because we are the top destination of Afghans for Afghan refugees. But again, because of the housing crisis that, by the way, is national, it is not just a California thing, but because of all the housing issues we have, it's really hard for folks to get resettled here. So there's a lot you can do. And I think I'll stop there because I can go on and on about all of these different intricate and complicated policy things that are so relevant and touch on everything.
I will lobby the powers that be at the museum to make our follow-up program several hours long rather than just one, in order to allow you to go into the depth that we benefit from hearing from. But Joe, in addition to that policy overview, you made just a critically important point about how to help. And I'm going to ask Etleva and I'm going to ask Habib in just a second as well to answer our audience member's question about how an audience member who wants to help can help. But I want to thank you, Joe, for offering such an important reminder. I always tell my students there's two ways to make change. You can make change deep, you can make change wide. And having that kind of impact on an individual, on a family, is so meaningful and so critically important, as both Habib and Etleva have been talking about. And it's not just commendable, it's noble. But the kind of policy change you're talking about doesn't just affect one person or a few people, it can affect millions of people. So it's important that not get lost in the conversation. I'm very glad you made sure it came up. Etleva, to answer our audience member's question, what else can someone who wants to help do? How can they help you do more of the good work that you and your colleagues are doing?
Thank you for the question. So as Joe and all of our national partners continue at the policy level and make sure that there are resources available for more meaningful change in terms of the services we are provided, we continue doing our work, dealing with the issues that are coming up and being creative on how to use our resources. And as I already mentioned, the program is a private-public partnership by design, is intended to depend on the community, but even on the practical level, it is truly, as Joe mentioned already, housing is a challenge. It's not a refugee challenge or an immigrant challenge. Housing is a challenge, period. All of our clients, as I mentioned, JFS serves many other areas of need, like homeless programming, food insecurities, or it could be a challenge because people are not working enough hours or are not earning enough to cover the cost of living. So we see our need for support as part of this bigger community because the refugees are here to stay. They are going to be part of this community and they are going to be part of the same discussions that are happening, how we address all of those challenges and issues. And how the community can support is by being as open and welcoming as possible in the bigger sense of things. And by that, I mean understanding and coming, joining events, community events to understand who the refugees are, who are the Afghans, who are the SIVs. Once you have met that person directly, then you get a little bit more of a better feel of where is your effort going. And as Habib said, I mean, Afghani SIVs, people from Albania, it doesn't matter where you come from. There is that aspiration to make the best of the opportunities that you are given here. However, the path there is not always a straightforward one. It could get a little bit more complicated. People need a hand to understand and navigate the systems, and that's the role of the resettlement agencies. But we do that with the support of our partners in the community-based organizations as well, and a lot through groups, community groups that just take it upon themselves to support a refugee family or an SIV family that is coming, or individuals. At least for JFS, speaking on behalf of JFS, we have quite a few opportunities for volunteering. One of them is called the Friendly Match, where a US family is matched with a new arriving family and become that bridge to the community, and they get to do things above and beyond what a resettlement case manager can do throughout the limited time and resources that we have. What we have seen through those efforts is long-term friendships have been built. Like some of our Friendly Match volunteers have worked with families for more than 5 or 6 years now, and now they've become like family, enjoy spending Thanksgiving with each other and enrich each other's culture in terms of food, as you were saying. But more importantly than that, show them the welcoming in the community, but also the ways how to reach their full potential. Most recently, we had 2 former refugee families that arrived. Their children both applied to college and got accepted to local higher institutions in San Diego. And in their essay, they said that if it wasn't for JFS and the name of the volunteer that worked very closely with them in trying to figure out how to apply for college and scholarships and all of what it takes to get into local college, then they would not have been able to achieve that. And we heard from the colleges directly, actually.
Etleva, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We've had a rush of questions come in just in the last few minutes, so we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I want to make sure we get to a couple. And one of them, I think, is something you can help us with fairly quickly. Naomi Steinfeld wants to know if you're working with any organizations or groups working on resettlement in the LA County area to whom we can direct them.
So JFS San Diego is locally located here, although there are networks of partners all over. And I see Joe wants to jump in, so please go ahead.
Yeah, and this gets to some of the other questions. You know, HIAS doesn't do resettlement in Los Angeles right now. There are a number of agencies that do. I will happily share a link with the Holocaust Museum LA for folks to kind of get a better sense of how they could help more locally, as well as explaining a bit of what the housing process may look like, because I know a number of folks have signed up as well. So we will not neglect that, but I think that would help address that one thing.
And then there is also opportunities to support from afar, even though you might be in LA. If this is a topic that is of interest to you and you would like to support the effort, regardless where it is, there is in-kind donation. Amazon wish lists are going on everywhere, so people can help. Just to put things in context, there is some federal funding that supports the refugees as they arrive with their SIVs, with their initial needs, but it's never enough. So we depend on in-kind donation to ensure that whatever funding is available actually goes towards paying for housing costs or bill. So that's where our community comes in with creating a list of what a family would need as they move into a new apartment.
Thank you.
And also in-kind donations in terms of food items and stuff. Sorry, then, but just wanted to address that piece because I can see how being in San Diego and being in LA might seem like I would like to do something, but how do I do it? Those are the ways.
Right. Thank you both very much. And as all of you can see, if you look into the chat box, the amazing Jordana Gessler has already posted contact information for both HIAS and JFS San Diego. And we'll also make available to you as a follow-up information on the Los Angeles opportunities as well. Although, as Etleva correctly mentions, we can help anywhere. We're just about running out of time, but there's a fascinating question which I'd like any of you to take on. But Habib, I think you might be uniquely qualified for this. Susan Khan asks the following question. She says, I'm an architecture student who's designing a museum about refugees. What would you like to see in terms of importance as part of the exhibits? What would you want a museum to reflect?
My siblings and millions of hundreds of thousands of other people like my siblings, when they left home, they didn't bring anything with them, just their clothes and a few pictures from their families, and maybe in a small backpack. Anything from from a refugee like that will be so meaningful. These people are running whatever is threatening their lives with that much belongings, and they arrive at the shores of the United States or somewhere else, with so much hope, and they start their life from that point with that pair of clothes and a little bit of whatever memory they have packed in pictures and stuff. So I think that would be very, very meaningful to a lot of people.
It's a wonderful question. And for those of you
May I add to that though?
very quickly, Etleva, because we're just about out of time.
Very quickly. Just wanted to add that that's a wonderful starting point. But one thing we don't talk about is how resilient the refugees are and the successes that they achieve. So you can start from anywhere, but having the motivation and drive, then people are successful as they are here, and they're not just depending on the community. They just need that hand in the beginning to be successful.
Okay. So Joe, we're just about out of time. Both Habib and Etleva have been able to give us some very inspirational last words to take with us. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we call it a day?
I would say thank you, and really don't think that advocacy isn't enough. That is just it really underlines and supports everything else that we need to be doing to help Afghan refugees and folks from elsewhere.
I couldn't agree with you more. This change has to happen deep and it has to happen wide. And Naomi, thank you for all the advocacy work you're doing. But I think the point that we hear from all three of our guests is it has to be done at all levels: personal, community, local, and political. That's the way we make change happen. Etleva, Bejko, Joe Goldman, Habib Zahori, thank you so much for being with us today, sharing your experience and your insights and your wisdom, and giving us your guidance, not only on how to better understand the depth and breadth of this crisis, but to better understand what we can do to make a difference in moving forward. Thanks to the entire team at the museum. Jordana Gessler, who you already met, of course, is incredible, but Beth Keane, our executive director, Guy Lipa, our chair, and the entire group who works tirelessly on behalf of the museum and the people we serve every day deserve our thanks also. And finally, and most importantly, thank you to our audience, to the people who join us both at the museum in person and who join us for important discussions like these. We're so grateful to you. Our Building Bridges program, as many of you know, takes place on the first Thursday of every month, in which we talk about a different important topic. Next month in November, the very beginning of November, our program will be on building bridges, not beyond the Jewish community, both in the Jewish community. And we'll be having people talking both on behalf of the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi communities, talking about how to make our various peoples with very different heritages even closer and to understand each other even better than they already do. So we'll be sending you out more information on that, and we hope you'll join us. Etleva, Joe, Habib, all of you, thank you so much. Hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and we'll look forward to having you join us for future conversations down the line. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.